Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Along with John Davies, we built this building, and we have a limitation of only 50 here, so someone's got to get up and move out. But thank you for being here today to hear about how to acquire a second home, which is exactly what President Roosevelt wanted to do, and actually did do in early 1942. But before I begin, I would like to just, again, thank you for being here. And you can stop me, ask some questions if you'd like, or you can just hold them till the end. We're going to have a couple of poster boards here, which I have some material that I received from the Presidential Library at Hyde Park, where I went down there and did work. And they actually give you copies of the original documents. So some of the material you will see here today is actually copies of the originals that I held in my hand when I was down at the library. And also, to help with the projection, Dave Vandewater has graciously put a few of the slides up on this. We're not going to have a major PowerPoint presentation. I'm not a big fan of all that. I'd like to just run through it and tell you how it all came about. What is Camp David, and actually where is it? It's a question I often hear. Camp David is the presidential retreat located 70 miles northwest of Washington, D.C. By helicopter, it's less than a half hour. By car, it's about 2 hours, depending on traffic. It's up in the Cumberland Mountains of Maryland, the Catoctin Mountains, up in northwest corner of Maryland. And this is a topographic map of the area of the forest. Just to give you a perspective, right down here in the lower right corner is Thurmont, Maryland. Thurmont, Maryland is a town of about 6,000 people, located approximately 70 miles northwest of Washington and about 10 miles or 12 miles south of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. If you're familiar with that part of the country, you take Route 15 out of Bethesda and up you go. And Route 15 takes you right into Thurmont. Now in Thurmont, you get off the highway and you come on this road, you work your way around into the mountains, and then right here at this point, we'll be covering this more later on. And for those of you over there, I can point out it's right here. You come into the mountains, and there's a cutoff right here, and now you're on a mountain road that's basically closed during the winter time. To put this into perspective for all of us here, it would be like, how many here are familiar with the Kelly Stand Road? All right, East Arlington, you go up to Kelly Stand and you get to the base of Stratton. You're on the backside of Stratton. You're not up on the mountain, but you're high enough. What Arlington is to Stratton, Thurmont is to Camp David. All right, and there's also a few other similarities. Thurmont is at 600-foot elevation. Camp David up here is at 1,880-foot elevation. And very much like when you go up the back road to Kelly Stand to Stratton, you're about 2,000 feet before you get, then you can go climb Stratton. I think you get up to about 4,000 feet. That's the location. You come up this road, this state road, and then you cut off and you go up this road. Very curvy, very narrow, and then it takes you to these campsites. But we'll tell you more about that when we get into the Roosevelt part. The official name of Camp David is the Naval Support Facility Thurmont. And so if you write and you send, and I've done this, when you send material to Camp David, you send it to the Naval Support Facility Thurmont. It's operated by the Navy. Do we have any Navy veterans here? A few. And I'll tell you later why the Navy got to be chosen to be the operators of Camp David. The Army runs the communication, and the Marines run the security. Today, the camp is very secure and highly secure, I should say. And I heard this when I went down there, and after my novel was published, the Marines had me come to Washington, and they had the security people from Camp David meet me in Washington at the Marine Barracks, and they were telling me you came very close in your novel in describing what we have there today as the security. And I was talking about cameras, sound detectors, smell detectors, DNA, all kinds of material. And it's protected now by a full company of 160 Marines. Back in Eisenhower's day, we were there with 24. Right. So things have changed. As most presentations of a historical nature go, you normally start at the beginning and work your way forward. I'm going to do just the opposite. I'm going to start today and work my way back to 1942, which is really how we acquired this second home. The camp has been, over the years, has been really fixed up. How many here have ever been to a Girl Scout or Boy Scout camp in the woods? And it's pretty rustic and so forth. That's the way it had been, right? And that's actually what it was. But today it's fairly luxurious with all kinds of modern amenities that are available to the various presidents and their families. And that happened over a period of years. That just didn't happen recently, but from the time President Kennedy took over to the time President Obama has left. Now, since Roosevelt founded the place in 1942, there have been we've had 13 presidents who have had access to Camp David. The current president, if I'm not mistaken, I don't even believe he's been to Camp David. But setting President Trump aside and not giving you a whole lot of statistics about how many times presidents visited Camp David, which is a statistic we have, the presidents have used it, some very frequently and some not too frequently. For example, President Obama used it 39 times during his 8 years. President Bush used it 150 times during his young Bush, 150 times during his administration. The other presidents, President Carter initially wanted to close the place when he took over, but he elected to keep it, and I'll tell you a little bit about what happened when he was there. President Truman had the same feeling. He wanted to close it, but then he got to use it. And really what happens, I think it becomes an addiction to the presidents, that once they get there, right? Once they get there, they realize how, how many more chairs do we have? Oh, can't help that. Once they get there, they feel it is such a relief to be at Camp David. And what I mean by that is, it is so private, it is so secured, the press is not there unless they're invited. The closest the press can come to the area is down here in Thurmont. You have to stay there. If the president invites them up, they can come up, but rarely do they ever get access to the camp, except if there's some major event going to go on there and they want to get some publicity. So during the course of the presidencies, working our way back, President Clinton initially was not going to Camp David because he had an allergy to the hickories. The hemlocks. And so he rarely used it, and then he decided there was a time of year when he can go there and not be impacted by the hemlocks. And then he used it quite a bit. And of course he had a very famous conference there. I think it was with the Prime Minister Barak, is that right, of Israel, and Yasser Arafat of the Palestinian group, PLO, and I think that was it was during the Clinton administration. And of course, they nearly came to an agreement while they were there. Moving over to President Carter, again, someone who initially didn't like the place, but then really became very aware of its privacy. He had a conference there that lasted several days with several world leaders, And you may recall he had Anwar Sadat of Egypt there, and he had Menachem Begin of Israel there. And they were there for quite a few days. And they hammered out a treaty. And the treaty was the peace treaty with the Israelis and the Egyptians. And that was 40 years ago. That was in 1978. And that still is in effect today. Other presidents had other meetings there. President Obama had the G8 summit there in 2000, I think it was 2012. And of course, during the Eisenhower administration, we had Prime Minister Macmillan came up in March of 1959. And of course, what really put Camp David on the map, in my opinion, was the meeting that Eisenhower had there in September of 1959 with Nikita Khrushchev. And that was a meeting that the first time in American history a Soviet leader ever came to the United States. And Khrushchev was initially disturbed over the fact that he was going to get in a helicopter and fly from Washington to Camp David. And he wouldn't go in that helicopter unless Eisenhower went in there with him. Right? And when you do all the reading about the Khrushchev visit, and you read his memoirs, he refers to it as Eisenhower's, if I have to pronounce it right, his Dachau. And that was his Dachau. And he went there. And they were there for 3 days, and we were with them for 3 days up at Camp David, working with the KGB and the Secret Service. So when we walked the fence line, both the Secret Service agent would be out there, as well as someone from the KGB. And then when Eisenhower, like some of us, we needed our afternoon nap, Eisenhower would take a nap, and Khrushchev would walk around the beautiful trails that are up there. Eisenhower also took Khrushchev down to his place in Gettysburg, which was, as I mentioned to you, if this is the camp, Eisenhower would go back on this road, up Route 15, and right to his farm. Have anyone ever been to his home, the Eisenhower home? It's in Gettysburg, right opposite one of the main battlefields. And just so you know, this farm that was up here, the Eisenhower Farm, was the first home Eisenhower had owned in America. He had never owned a home, because if you recall, he came out of a farm in Kansas and went right to West Point. And from West Point, he served up until 1948, when he came back and was brought in as the president of Columbia University. Served there for a little bit of time, went back to Europe. They provided him a home in Belgium when he was the head of NATO. And then in 1952, he came back to the United States and ran for president, and then bought the farm in Gettysburg. Well, that farm was being fixed up over a number of years, so Camp David to him, when he won the presidency in 1953, was very convenient. But another feature about Eisenhower at Camp David, he went there in January of 1953, and he went and toured the place, and he changed the name. Right? And he changed the name. Many people think it's just his grandson. He named it after his grandson. He named it after his father and his grandson. And he felt the name, people know what the name was before? Shangri-La. Right? We're going to get to that in a minute, how we got to the name Shangri-La. But Eisenhower decided that name was too haughty, so he changed it to Camp David. And that name is obviously held till now. I hope it stays that way. Again, other presidents, without getting into too many of the statistics, President Johnson didn't use it that much because many of the presidents had homes in other places. Even the Bush family, President Bush used it quite a bit. His father used it quite a bit as well. And they had a home in Kennebunkport, Maine, and the young Bush has a home, or continues to have a home, in Crawford, Texas. So he could go to these other places. President Obama liked the place, although he didn't like the fact that they didn't have any golf. He chose to go to, on his vacation, we go to Martha's Vineyard or Hawaii. So the other presidents used it for a whole lot of reasons. And under President Kennedy, the place was opened up to the families of the presidency or the cabinet or the president. But again, the only time you can go there is at the permission of the White House. Right? It's not open to everyone. Today now, with the not being utilized by President Trump, his cabinet uses it, and other people in the White House get the chance to use him. One other thing about during the whole presidencies, under President Johnson, for whatever reason, he did not allow his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, to ever go to Camp David. Because, again, it was controlled by the White House. Right? So one of the requests before he died, under the Carter administration, Vice President Humphrey had asked President Carter, could he go to Camp David? He wanted to see it, because he had never seen it before, and he did. President Carter brought him up. So now let's go, I sort of rushed through the last 12 presidents, but now let's get to Roosevelt and the second home that was necessary. Dave, do you want to show that slide of, before I do that, of
Roosevelt?
no, Khrushchev? And, that, can you all see that? I'll get it. Can you see that over here? Oh, let me put this. We don't need this. This was September 1959. It's the first time a Soviet leader had come to the United States. I'll point out. This is Chairman Khrushchev. This is President Eisenhower. This is Nina Khrushchev. Over here is the interpreter, and here is the head of the Secret Service, the White House Secret Service. This is out at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. It was it's the same car, I believe, that 4 years later President Kennedy was using in Texas. Notice how things have changed. In 1959, open car, two of the world leaders. 11 miles they drove from Andrews into Washington, D.C. And then Khrushchev stayed at the the Blair House across the street from the White House. And then he spent a few days there. And then he went and toured the United States. He went to Pittsburgh, Iowa, Los Angeles, and then he came back, and then he flew to Camp David in the helicopter. Thanks, Dave. There's a small little map. I didn't realize it'd be such a large crowd here. I would have brought a big world map. But I want to point out to you, and try to picture now, it's early 1942. Right? And you all know what happened in December of 1941. So in 1942, most of Europe was being overrun, most of North Africa was being overrun, and most of the Pacific was being overrun, the Philippines being there, and they fell in late April, early May 1942. But to the Secret Service, and specifically to Mike Riley, who was Roosevelt's chief of White House Secret Service and a very close companion of Roosevelt during the Roosevelt years. As far as Mike Riley was concerned, it was right here that he had the greatest fear. And that is, if those of you over there, to help you see, it's right over here, right off the coast of Virginia, right off Hampton Roads. And it was there that Riley felt that Roosevelt in his yacht, the Potomac, was going to be a prime target for the Nazi submarines that were off the coast of Virginia. So Riley, having the final authority, told this president that you no longer can use your yacht. the yacht was going to be beached, and so it was beached in late January 1942. And Roosevelt, not unlike Kennedy, was very nautical. He enjoyed the ocean, he enjoyed sailing, and this was a major blow to him because he wasn't every weekend trying to get back to Hyde Park. That was too much of a journey from Washington. So he said to his staff in February 1942, find me a second home. Right? Find me a second home. That was above 1,000 feet in elevation, within 2 hours of Washington, and most important, was cheap. Right? And I'll show you that, and I emphasize that word cheap. Roosevelt did not want to spend much money on this. So the search now went on, a major search by the Treasury Department, by the Interior Department, and specifically by the Secret Service, to find the president a place to live. And then the search incorporated Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia. And they went to these big estates, very much like you would see today. I guess they call them camps up in the Adirondacks. Is that the right word? Very finished places. And many of these places were in existence, but they were owned by Republicans, and they did not want to give it over to the president, either sell it to him, lease it to him, or just donate it. That was just out of the question. So they had this most difficult time finding a place, and every place that they did see that they thought could be reasonable, the price was well over $150,000 to $300,000. And I'll tell you later on what that means in today's dollars, right? Roosevelt was then told by Dr. Drury, the head of the Interior Department, that, or the National Park Service, that we have a place for you to go. And the place was in the Catoctin Mountains of Maryland. There were 3 camps, and if you can see this over here, these 3 camps, which I have circled, you can see that? All right, that were built in 1935 to 1938, called the Catoctin Mountain Recreational Development Camps, built for government employees and their children by the WPA, by reclaiming this massive forest area that had been left in ruins for many, many decades. So the WPA went up there and removed millions of feet of lumber that was on the logs that were on the ground, and really cleaned it up and built these 3 camps. The 3 camps were Misty Mount, on pretty much close in. The one over here on the left was Camp Green Top, and the one in the middle is High Catoctin, Camp number 3. All right? Misty Mount would have been the most logical, but it was going to cost well over $150,000 to fix up. The reason I say the most logical, it was the closest in. He didn't have to go all the way up this road. And it was at 1,100 feet of elevation. So it met the time, it met the elevation, but it didn't meet the cost. Green Top over here could have met all 3, but guess what? Someone by the name of Wild Bill Donovan of the OSS fame took possession of it. Do you all know who Wild Bill Donovan?
Yeah, I know who he was.
Okay.
He was he was the first head of the OSS.
Right, right. A decorated World War I hero, and Roosevelt appointed him the head of the OSS, which I'm making a little bit of a leap here. It was the predecessor to the CIA. And so this camp, called Green Top, at 1,800 feet, was taken over by the OSS to train saboteurs, espionage agents, bomb experts, and a whole kinds of mischief was going to be carried on there. And it was actually carried on there. Then, so they settled on camp number 3, High Catoctin, and they gave an estimate to Roosevelt in late March, And he got very upset with it, and I'll tell you what he wrote. And this came from the Roosevelt Library. Do we have this? You may have it covered.
Oh, there's Roosevelt. Is this it?
Yeah, okay. David has it here, but let me read it to you because it's very difficult to see it there. Roosevelt, again, emphasizing the need for financial austerity, wrote in April 1st, April 1, 1942, and keep the dates in the back of your mind for a minute. Memorandum from Mike Riley. Tell him that I want an estimate as I asked for, redoing the main floor, the second floor of the cottage, put in a small heater for existing cottage, fixing up the administration building for all staff and servants, bringing in the electric, a temporary repair for the running water and sewage, and no other item, either construction or repair. I think the whole thing ought to cost $15,000. Can he do it? He goes on to say, this kind of estimate makes me think I ought to abandon the whole idea. April 1941. I'm sorry, April 1942. So then Dave, now if you can put on, you have the slide of the, what are we talking about? I mentioned to you, this was a children's camp, children and parents. It was basically a couple of cabins plus a big meeting hall. And in the meeting hall, nothing was heated, and it was really bare bones. This map that David has up there now, it's very difficult to see. I guess you can't see it at all from there. Oops. You can just kick that leg back out. I only show you this because I want to talk, I'll mention something later about it. When you go to Hyde Park, I was able to get a copy of this. And what this is it's a site plan of the camp. And it shows all the Marine security positions, right? And also the Secret Service. The entrance of the camp is here, and you go around the road here to where the president's house is. But I have better maps. But I just want to show you that. You have the next one, Dave? I'm really interested in the floor plan. Okay, this thing doesn't work on that. For you folks over here, the house that Roosevelt, or the building that they saw when they took over the camp, was this one right here, right? And that's all that existed there at the time, plus a few cabins. And for you folks over here, we can show it over here. How's this? Right. Again, this is material from Hyde Park, and this building just existed here, and then the building on the right, those of you in the back have a difficult time maybe seeing that. Basically, it was going to be an attachment or an addition, 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms. This is the master bedroom, 3rd and 4th bedroom. And then this is the master bedroom because the doorway here and the bathroom here was much larger because President Roosevelt was wheelchair bound. The walls on this building, these rooms here and out here, literally the wall would be pushed out and the wall would convert to a ramp. And during the greatest fear Roosevelt always had was fire. How would I escape if there's a fire? So he had the Navy had the camp built, the room built, so that the wall would actually, a section of the wall would actually go out to the outside. They proposed, Roosevelt wanted fireplaces. The place had no heat, so we had fireplaces here and here. That would be right here. These are fireplaces, and this is the wing that Roosevelt built, wanted built. Now, if we can go to that other slide, Dave, where we show the sketch.
Oh, no, I lost it.
If you don't have it, I have it.
Let's get it right up. sketch?
No, it's a floor.
We copied it.
It's a floor plan sketch.
No, I don't have it, sorry.
You don't have it. I have it here. I can show everyone. These are the drawings done by the architect for the Department of Interior. This and this. Right? This drawing, this sketch, actually held in my hand. This sketch was done by Roosevelt. Roosevelt felt he was an amateur architect. He really loved architecture. So he actually sketched it, and for the most part, they followed it. Right? They followed it. You all see that? Right? And again, when was this being done? It was being done in late March 1942. Right? Now it comes April 22nd, 1942. Roosevelt wants to see this place for the first time. Exactly what you folks are telling me I'm going to, where's my second home? So in April of 1942, April 22nd, and the date's important, right? He goes up that mountain road, very much like going up the Kelly stand, on and on and on. And keep in mind now, it's 1942, the cars aren't all the best, the roads aren't the best. And he tells his folks, I feel like I'm going so far into the mountains, I'm going to Shangri-La. And why Shangri-La? Why did he choose that word?
Escape?
No. Why do you think Roosevelt picked that particular title?
I'm sorry.
Well, that was the name of the yacht that Roosevelt owned, was it not?
Beg your pardon?
Wasn't that the name of the yacht that Roosevelt owned?
No.
No one knew where it was.
For the most part. One more.
It's a bestseller by James Hilton.
It was a bestseller by James Hilton in the 1930s. The book, The Lost Horizon. And Lost Horizon, very briefly, a plane crashes in the Himalayas. The monks come down, rescue the passengers, take them up the mountains to their retreat, this mythical place, and they live to be many, many years old. And it was called Shangri-La. Now, the week before, on April the 18th, Colonel Doolittle, his planes take off from the Hornet, off the 400 or 500 miles off the coast of Japan, and they bomb Tokyo. Roosevelt was asked by the press, how could that have happened? Where did those planes come from? Roosevelt told them it came from nowhere, they came from Shangri-La. So Roosevelt felt very strongly that he was going so far into the mountains, he felt he was into Shangri-La. It also helped that Ronald Coleman had done a movie in 1942 called The Lost Horizon. Right? So now getting back, so that Roosevelt, that's how the name comes about, and then Roosevelt chooses to really become more involved in it, and he does the sketch. And now April 24th, 1942, his aides come back to him with a budget. You have that, Dave? Or, if you don't have it, that's okay.
My apologies
All
for
right.
this.
No, don't worry about it, Dave. I have it right here. Now, here again, I have from
Here, Don.
what Dave has up there. Again, it's so it's this document right here that appears in a magazine called Vermont Magazine, and it's covered up by another document, but we'll talk about that later. This is the budget I'm referring to. This budget was done April 24th, 2 days after Roosevelt went there. And the budget put out by the U.S. Department of Interior, by the Director of the National Park Service, which really managed this whole thing. Here's the budget. Without giving you all the details, it comes to $18,850 to fix this place up. Okay? I mentioned to you earlier that Roosevelt wanted it done for $15,000. And $15,000, by the way, in today's dollars, using the inflation put out by the Department of Labor, would be $232,000. So $15,000 in 1942 is $232,000 today. This budget of $18,000 was given to Roosevelt, and this is his handwriting down here, as well as these notations right here. And Roosevelt didn't like it. Right? And he said, for the Secret Service, they wanted more telephone for $150. He said, don't charge that to me, charge it to the Secret Service. That came out. He has entrance driveway improvements. This is the road from the gate to the house, dirt road. They wanted to make it paved. He said, forget it, charge it to the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, right? And not to me. And also to use calcium chloride to keep the dust down. So that came out. And the other one, under Vista Select, behind the house at Camp David, you get this beautiful vista of down the valley. And he wanted more of the trees cut, and in cutting them, he said, do not charge me the $1,250, charge it to the WPA. So this is the level of detail that he got involved in. It's just amazing. And down here, what gets me, what I thought was really interesting, I mentioned to you on that other map, all the security that was up there when the president would be there. He says down here, they were planning to put the Secret Service in huts that they were going to build, cabins. He puts down here, have the Secret Service sleep in tents. Now you can imagine that today. So the long and the short of it is, on that, so that was the end of April. May, they started construction. There was a big shortage of material. Keep in mind, this is a 143-acre site, and they had to put barbed wire around the complete site 8 to 10 feet high. And then beyond the barbed wire was a Jeep road, and then beyond that road was a regular, they put up a fence, a wire fence, so a Jeep can circle the whole place. They had to get that. They had to build this addition to the house. They had to build quarters for other people. Generally, when Roosevelt was there would be 40. At times, there'd be 100. And they had to provide for that. The Marines, when they were guarding Roosevelt in 1942, stayed down at Misty Mount. They didn't have to have quarters up at the camp for them. They just came up to provide the security. Today, there's 100, like I mentioned, there's 160 Marines there. They have quite a facility, a dispensary, a chapel, a library, a beautiful mess hall, and quite a few other facilities. So Roosevelt watched the construction, and it started in May, proceeded on into June. They had horrible weather in May of 1942, so things were delayed, and he really wanted to be there by the end of June. And much got done the week of the 1st of June, 1942. And of course, that's 75 years ago today. Today is the 4th of June. And also, while he was working on his camp, his second home, he was also keeping in touch with Admiral Nimitz, because today was the beginning of the Battle of Midway, and which is, a lot of people feel, is the turning point of, in the Pacific in World War II. So a lot was going on while this was going on. And also in May, the Philippines fell to the Japanese, and Corregidor and all these other places out there we lost. All this was going on while he was looking at this property, but he was staying in touch with everything. So finally, in July 1942, the camp was ready for him to come up and look at. And when I was in Washington, when my novel came out, the Marines provided me with this document, which is really interesting, written by a Navy chief. It's a private publication put out by the Navy, a bit about the history of Camp David and so forth. But it also has in it the logbook. Now, I mentioned to you earlier, Roosevelt was very nautical. He had been on his yacht, the Potomac. He lost the yacht. Camp David was basically his second home. Now, he felt it was a second home to go relax and be away and so forth. Publicly, the head of his Secret Service, writing in his book, Riley of the White House, which came out after the war, Riley felt officially that it was more than just a second home for the president to get away. Shangri-La was obtained for the express purpose of having a secure, isolated place for the president in the event of constant air raids on Washington. The buildings at Shangri-La were located near the top of, he refers to it as 1,500-foot elevation, which looked geologically like any other similar mountain in the area. The buildings, because of their foliage and camouflage, were invisible from the air, and that's true. The place is heavily wooded, and you couldn't see these rustic cabins. The area was almost impregnable to assault by any organized group because of the natural terrain and the diligent Marines on guard. In the event of an actual air raid on the area, the president was to be removed from the cottage to a nearby slit trench until the raid was over. Well, thank God none of that ever happened. And now today, I can assure you, there's a lot more security at Camp David than a slit trench for the president. And much of that was built during Eisenhower's time. And it's very, very secure for in the event anything ever happened. Now, getting back to Roosevelt, I mentioned that he wanted to stay on his yacht, but he refers to Shangri-La as the USS Shangri-La, right? And that's right here in the logbook. Right? Roosevelt created this logbook, right? So now, if you were a visitor to Camp David with Roosevelt, or being invited by him, you would actually sign the log, and as if you were going on board a yacht. Now, listen to the terms that he had now during this short period of time. This is July 5, 1942, launched at Catoctin, meaning they launched it. And when the ship is launched, it's not quite done yet. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of work still to be done. But he went up there and they were launching it. With them was Margaret Suckley, his close companion, Harry Hopkins, Elizabeth Hawley, and John McCrae. They were guests at that time. 2 weeks later, first trial run. Right? That's in the book. Right? William Donovan, the head of the OSS, came from next door. Grace Tully, who many of you may know was his very close secretary, and FDR would sign it. And then there was another advisor to the president, James Burns. He was up there on that visit. Following week, July 25th, so he's going up almost weekly in the summer. Again, Donovan, Grace Tully, FDR, and Wally Walker, I don't know who that is. And the final trials is what it was named. August 8th to the 11th, it's accepted. August 22nd, it's commissioned. August 30th, with Averill Harriman there, Grace Tully, Robert Sherwood, Harry Hopkins, full steam. And then he's got other dates, inspection, and then after that he would refer to them as 1943 cruise, and then get into 1944. And just to stay with this for a minute, in May of 1943, following year now, right? He refers to it as recommissioned. Again, he's referring to it as a ship. Eleanor Roosevelt went with him. All right, Anna Roosevelt, his daughter, Franklin Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill. Okay, and it was at Shangri-La in 1943 that they were planning the invasion of Europe. And then he got news here. He writes in the logbook that the king of Italy had resigned, and that they're invading Sicily. All right, so a lot of things were going on at that time, and I want to get back to August 8th for just a minute. But before I do, when I was doing my research at the library in Hyde Park, after I spent my time there, I went out to lunch with the director, and I asked him, how could it be that the country could be in such dire straits in the winter and spring of 1942, and the president could take the time out to be looking for a second home, okay, to be getting involved in the architecture of the second home, which is not really involved, but it was enough, and to be getting involved with the cost estimates. I mean, and he said to me, "Are you familiar with the work of great leaders?" I said, "Well, nothing more than I just would read." He said, "Well, great leaders would take the time out from their whatever they were doing, whatever they were focusing on, and get diverted to something else." And he actually referred me to Churchill, and he said Churchill would leave London, go to he had a place in I think it was Chartwell or Chequers, and he would work on his writing, his painting, and he loved to build brick wall. He loved to do masonry projects. Roosevelt loved to work on his stamp collection. He loved to fish, and he also was a bird watcher. He loved to spend early morning, especially at Hyde Park, looking at birds up by Red Hook, New York. I guess, and I've read that now over the years with other great leaders, they just take time out, even though they got the weight of the world on their shoulders. They take the time out to do other things. And I'm going to ask Derek in a minute to tell me if he felt the same way about many of the leaders that he's known in his career at the UN and all that. But I want you to know that Roosevelt did visit the place quite often, and a lot of the war strategy was planned there. I mentioned to you that Churchill was there in May of 1943, and some of you may have studied Churchill and the kind of character that he was. So Roosevelt takes him down to Frederick. Frederick is a major town south of Thurmont, to show him the town of Frederick and one of the wonderful historic sites there, and that is the home of, if I have it right, Barbara Fritchie. Is that the way you say that? It was in that home that she hung out the flag, and of course what made it really famous was the poem by John Greenleaf Whittier. Some of you may have remember this from high school or college. Up from the meadows rich with corn, clear in the cool September morn. Up rose old Barbara Fritchie then, bowed with her 80. She was 90 years old. And basically what Barbara did, she put out the American flag when General Stonewall Jackson came through Frederick. And she defied him, and his troops were going to shoot at her. And he said, if any troops shoots at that old lady, I'll shoot at them. This is Jackson saying that. So they give, and the poem goes on for quite a bit. Right? So when Roosevelt took Churchill to the historic site, Churchill met the director, and as it was leaving, Churchill recited the poem by memory. That was Churchill. And then another time when he was up at Shangri-La, he just didn't want to stay there. He decided to have the Marines take him down to Thurmont. He wanted to meet with the folks in the local pub. So that was Churchill. And just as an aside, I understand that it may not have been Barbara Fritchie who put out the flag. It may have been a much younger lady. And the people in Frederick will tell you, allegedly, she put it out. And so we'll just leave that at that. Getting back to the finalization of Shangri-La, it did, David doesn't have it there, the numbers came in at $28,000, which is about $420,000 in today's money. Here again, when the Department of Interior put that out, they made sure that some of this is going to be charged to the Secret Service, some of it to the WPA. They just did not want to upset Roosevelt in how much it was going to cost. Another meeting that really surprised me how these great leaders operated was this one in, I mentioned to you, they accepted Shangri-La on August the 8th, 1942. Right? They went up there, and with him was Margaret Patterson, Margaret Suckley, Admiral McLeish, Samuel Rousman, is it? Robert Patterson, Grace Tully, and FDR. August 8th was a very significant day in Washington. It was the day that the government, the U.S. government, executed the 6 German saboteurs who had snuck into the country on June 22nd and got caught. There were actually 8 of them. One turned the other 7 in. They were tried in federal court. The case went to the U.S. Supreme Court that was called into special session in late July at the, I forget who the Chief Justice was at the time. It wasn't Frankfurter, but the Chief Justice had a farm in New Jersey, and they called the special session of the court, of the Supreme Court, to hear this case. All right, picture now, they were captured in June of 22nd and executed on August the 8th. That was a Friday. And the same day, and Roosevelt, by the way, did not want this to be very well known because he didn't want the Americans to be fearful that 4 saboteurs came in from Long Island, 4 from Jacksonville, Florida, met in New York, and I think it was George Haupt. One of them turned the other 7 into the FBI. And the others, and one other was, only 6 were executed. The other 2 were sent back in 1947 to Germany. And it was there that Haupt said, the FBI didn't capture us, I turned the other 6 or 7 in. It was an interesting footnote to history. But it was amazing how this event was happening in D.C., and the president takes off by car to Shangri-La. So today, the presidents can get to Camp David up here in the mountains either by car, driving up from Washington, which is about, again, about an hour and a half today, or they can fly in by helicopter. And the helicopters today are put into hangars, and there's all kinds of security there for that. And they actually even have a fire department. The Navy has a fire department at Camp David. When I was there in 1957 to 60, when a helicopter landed at Camp David, it landed at second base on our ball field, which was, I don't have that on the map, was just a little bit off the main road. The helicopter would land, we'd be out there with fire extinguishers and a big tank of water. As the helicopter came down, we'd have a Jeep to take the president to Aspen, his cottage, and then we'd walk around the helicopter 24 hours a day to protect them. But today, again, it's a completely different place than it had been. Before I open it up for just questions, let me just mention one other thing about all of this, and that is Camp David wasn't the first retreat for a president. The first retreat, obviously, was Abraham Lincoln when he left the White House and went 3 miles up to the Washington Army-Navy home, and that was his second home, or home away from home, from the White House. But President Hoover in 1929 bought 1,100 acres out in the Shenandoah Mountains of Virginia, and he paid for the land himself, and he had a house built there for $22,000 back in 1929 because he wanted to be, and notice the similarities, he wanted to be above 2,500 feet. He wanted to be 2 hours from Washington, and the cost wasn't all that because he paid for it himself. And he had this house built, plus a bunch of cabins. Now, it got done for $22,000 because the Marines were nearby, and there's a whole bunch of carpenters and electricians and plumbers in this Marine unit that built it. And here again, he gave back to the Navy his yacht. It was called, I believe it was called the Mayflower. And he didn't want to be on the yacht. He wanted to be out in the woods. And definitely be out of Washington in the summer. Washington can be, if those of you who've been down in Washington in the summer, it's very oppressive. The White House is at between 25 and 40 feet, 40-foot elevation. You can imagine being up at 2,500 feet. So he wanted to leave. So they built this facility. It's called Hoover Camp, or it's, you know, on the Rapidan River, or Camp Rapidan, as sometimes it's referred to. Hoover built it in 29. In 1930-31, he had Anna Lindbergh there, and Charles Lindbergh. He also had the British Prime Minister there, MacDonald, in 1932, I believe. And they were to negotiate the settlement of the British debt that was owed to America from World War I. And the deal was, correct me if I'm wrong, the deal was that we would forgive the UK debt if they gave us Bermuda, Trinidad, and British Honduras. Imagine having Bermuda today. Wow. But the Depression came, and all negotiations were off. Also, the 1930 Naval Treaty was negotiated, or partly negotiated, at Camp Hoover. 1933, Hoover leaves office, Roosevelt takes over. Roosevelt goes to Camp Hoover to inspect it and decides he doesn't want to be there. It's too far away, really, and it was too rugged to get to, and not particularly for someone who's confined to a wheelchair. And so government employees used it, and his cabinet used it. His Secretary of the Navy died there in 1939, and then it wasn't used much during World War II, other than by the Boy Scouts. Given back to the government again, because Hoover had given it to the government, and the government used it again in all through the 50s and 60s. Jimmy Carter had gone there at one time, and Vice President Al Gore was the last public official to have gone there. The place now is under the auspices of the U.S. Department. I'm sorry, the Smithsonian Institution. Right? And once a year, you can get a tour of Hoover Camp or Camp Hoover. But they have a bus. It takes you from bus to the base of the camp, and then you got quite a hike to go in. Just a couple of anecdotal points. Some of the things that I had seen. I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, just outside the Bronx, and I was 17 when I got assigned to this duty. On my first trip to Camp David, which I believe was to provide the security for Prime Minister Macmillan, and the way it worked back then was the Marines from Washington always had 24 Marines at Camp David. The only security post that we ran, we had 2 Marines around the President's Lodge. We had 1 Marine at the gate, and that was it. The rest of us would go through some training stuff and all that. When the President was going to come to Camp David, another 24 would come up to Camp David from Washington, and we then go and spread ourselves around that fence line I showed you. 18 of us would be on the fence. One would be by the helicopter, one would be at the gate, and so forth. 4 hours on, 8 hours off, until the President left. Now, when we were going up there once from Washington, we were told the President's going there, so 24 of us had to gear up and get ready to go on our way to Camp David. We used to always stop at Frederick to get chow, because we were going to be on guard duty late at night and the mess hall would not be open. My 24-man platoon had 4 black Marines, right? 2 from New York, 1 from West Virginia, 1 from Ohio. Those 4 black Marines had to stay on the bus in Frederick. The sign was very clear, whites only. So we went to the diner, got the sandwiches, would bring sandwiches back, because by the time we got to Camp David, the mess hall would be closed. So we had to have something to eat. I got to tell you, that was so foreign to me. The same thing happened on the drill team part of it, where we used to go south of the United States with the Marine Corps drill team. The 4 black Marines on the drill team, same 4 blacks, could not come with us south of Virginia. we had to get 4 white Marines because you could not perform in public in the South with a mixed group. That all's changed. A few other things. If you were assigned to Camp David duty, the Presidential Guard, if you had gotten a speeding ticket or any ticket, $15 or more, you were gone. Right? Your clearance would have been lifted. Would be lifted. And the same thing if you were found talking about Camp David. So the Secret Service used to go home on liberty with some of our fellows and follow them, and they would go to a bar, and if somebody was chatting with their friend, "Oh, I'm at Camp David, I'm guarding the president," you were gone. It was, we couldn't talk about it for many, many years, even after we got out of the place. The camp, as you can see from this map, is on a straight line with the Great Lakes, and then you get it's really in a snow belt. So when we're there in the wintertime guarding the house, the 2 of us around the house, it was so cold that at times we would strip the cabins nearby of their molding and had it in a 55-gallon drum and actually burn the wood in this drum because it was so cold. I didn't drink coffee till I was in my 20s, and when the sergeant of the guard would bring coffee out, I would just take the coffee to put my fingers in it. Because the Marines at that time, right after the Korean War, did not have the equipment that the Air Force had. By the time I left, the Air Force gave us their cold weather equipment, and it was a whole different ball game. We used to protect Ike's his grandchildren. They used to come up there. Nixon and his 2 girls, and Ike, I think his son John had both a daughter and John Jr. Was that the name of the grandson? Another interesting thing that happened to me was when I did my novel, or when I was during the editing of my novel, Pete Kopp, a local author from Manchester, was my editor, and he said, "You better check out these locations you have in Gettysburg, Frederick, Thurmont, and Camp David." So when I was down on a reunion in Washington, I took a day off, went up to Camp David, and I mentioned to you the security. There's a sign there right over here when you exit this mountain road to get down here. It says, "No trespassing." Well, I went to the gate here, right here. I went to that gate, and 7 or 8 Marines come out, armed, and they make me stay away from the car. They put mirrors under the car. They searched the car, and of course, it wasn't very inviting to them. I had a map similar to this, a topo map with circles. I had a camera. I had binoculars, and they said, "You know, you were very suspect." And I said, then I also had that. I'll show you this. I'll show you what I had, which was very helpful. And I had this picture, okay? And I said, this is my ticket. And it's a picture of Eisenhower. This is the Aspen Lodge. And May 1st, 1960, Ike asked us all to come down, the Navy, the Army, and the Marines, take a photograph with him and Mamie. So I had that, and I said, I just want to check things out and go on a tour. And they said, there is no tour. And they held me for the Maryland police, state police. They came and they gave me a ticket for trespassing, a $50 ticket. And then when I renewed my CPA license in New York and Vermont the following year, you have to disclose if you got anything other than a parking ticket. And needless to say, that answer, that was a little bit questionable. And the last thing I'll mention to you is I mentioned to you, these maps, and in my novel, these maps would be too difficult for a reader to understand. So I had a local graphic designer take this map and made this map, and this is the map you'd see in the book, in the cover of the book. So if you're reading the novel, you could follow the story through the camp and so forth. But our daughter worked for the Office of the Secretary of Labor during the Bush administration, and one of her girlfriends worked in the White House, a couple of them did, and gave Andy Card, the president's chief of staff, the copy of my novel. Andy Card took the book to Iraq on a trip and read the book going over to Iraq. It's 11 hours. It's a fast read, I guess. He comes back. His aide calls Elizabeth and wants to know from Elizabeth, where did your father get all this information? Right? This is now 2004, maybe 2005. The book came out in 1995. Well, she knew enough, and she said he went to the Hyde Park Library, the Roosevelt Library in Hyde Park, and they provided all the information. And they pride themselves there that all the information that they have at the Hyde Park Library is open to the public, open for research. Thank you very much from my end of it. I know I was going very fast. Now, we'll have a meeting over here, those of you who want to know how to sign up for a second home, right? But you're not going to get it for $15,000.